Whatcha Know Joe?
I don't know nothing.
Whatcha Know Joe?
Tell me something.
Hello, this is Joe Wallenstein in the Whatcha Know Joe podcast. This is an exciting day. I finally am going to have a guest that I've wanted to have for a long time. A very dear and old friend of mine. We were assistant directors in New York, God knows how long. And he is actually responsible for my first job in California. With a man with a phenomenal track record. I give you Mr. Jonathan Sanger.
Hey, Joe, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to be with you. And I remember those early days when I worked for you and I was a second assistant and you were the first. And you hired me. So I only returned the favor when I came out here. You know.
We did a show called The Blue Knight. Mm-hmm. We did one episode and we went on hiatus. And in those days, it was a company called Lorimer. It was a 2-story building.
That's right, yeah.
And we had nothing to do all day but drink coffee and play darts. Well, you put a group of guys on coffee all day playing darts. And I think there was a gentleman named Bob Schlitt who decided we should have a contest of who could be the next game show host.
That's
right.
So
we would take turns in your new car. Well, the vice president upstairs was going out of his mind. He called out. He said, "You guys got to go do something." So they would send us out at night.
Well, we had David Jacobs there, who was sitting in his office.
James Hirsch.
Writing scripts. James Hirsch. Sure.
Dennis McCallion is how we met Dennis.
Right.
And they would send us out, and we would do pickup scenes for a show called Dog in the Water, which they never had any intention of ever seeing today, but it got us out of the office. But so many of those friendships were birthed. I mean, I know you've stayed in touch with Jim and Bob Schlitt. What I remember about that show is that on the last day we were shooting in this garage, and the character runs up and he passes this white wall. And we got it in one take. Mm-hmm. But then the art department asked if we could do another take. And when we set up for the other take, the guy in red paint wrote on the wall, "Experienced film crew available." We reshot the scene. And when they went to dailies, they only printed the one with the writing on the wall. I was sitting next to Lee Rich. And he literally exploded out of his chair. He had no sense of humor.
Yeah, well, very few people did it those days, I'll tell you.
So then I guess we all went our separate ways. They let David go. He went over to Family. And then became.
That's right.
And you.
I left actually to be a first AD on actual High Anxiety with Mel Brooks, and that was how I got. I mean, I met Mel actually through an old friend of my wife's, Barry Levinson.
Oh yeah.
And Barry introduced me to Mel. Mel was looking for a first AD, and I went in and I had I had an interview with him, and we hit it off. It was great. He liked me. He didn't have anybody particular that he had a guy that he used to use who was now the head of a studio or something. I mean, in production. So he hired me. And
you've done several movies with him, haven't you?
Well, I have, but this particular story has some, you will remember it because right after I got hired, you and your wife and me and my wife went down to Palm Springs for the weekend. We go down to Palm Springs. We go horseback riding. I mean, it was one of those incredible times.
Yes.
We went horseback riding in the morning.
Yes.
And then in the afternoon, we take the tram up to the top at Idlewild, and it's all snow up there. So we go tobogganing on the snow. And we were tobogganing on the snow, and somehow we were on a run that everybody realized, except me, who was in front, that this is not going to end well because there's a tree down the end of the run. So everybody bailed out but me, and I got my leg caught in the rope, and I turned the toboggan, and I heard a loud sound, and I knew immediately I had broken my leg. And and my wife, of course, came over and said, "Somebody has to go get ice." And I said, "Ice? There's snow everywhere." We just packed snow on my leg. We did. We did all of that.
Do you remember the rest of that?
You guys carried me.
Not you guys. It was 8 strangers who wouldn't identify themselves.
That's right. No one would. No, a doctor was happened. He says, "Oh, I'm a doctor. Good. What's your name? Don't worry." It was like, "I'm not going to tell you my name, but we're going to splint your leg right here." And he put some newspapers and stuff around it to temporarily splint it, and then everybody carried me in a little,
Like
some
a canvas.
a little canvas thing up to the back to the
I do
thing, and then
remember
we went down. I went to a hospital, had the thing set, and we went back to L.A. But the first thing that happened for me was I called Mel Brooks on Monday morning, and I said, Mel, and I had literally just got the job a few days before, and I said, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think I can do it. He said, what's the matter? What? I said, well, I broke my leg in Palm Springs. He says, you broke your leg? How'd you break your leg in Palm? I said, well, I was up in the snow. He says, wait a minute. You're up in the snow in Palm Springs? What? I said, and I explained the whole story to him. And at first, he thought about it. And he said, oh, man, he said, I'm so sorry. I really was looking forward to working with you. All right, well, and anyway, I hang up, he hangs up, and I'm feeling sorry for myself for about an hour or whatever. And about an hour later, I get a phone call. It's Mel. I said, Mel, what? He said, look, come on, kid, you think you could do it in a wheelchair? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I called... Herb Wallerstein, who was the head of production at 20th Century Fox. And I told him that I had this AD before you broke your leg, and he'd already told me, nah, you don't want to use a guy from New York. You got to find we'll get you somebody locally. He says, no, I like this guy. So now... when I called him up and told him you broke his leg, he said, see, Mel, I told you, you can't use these New York guys. He said, that's what he said. So he says, I don't like when somebody tells me I can't use somebody. He says, I want you to do this. So I said, well, I don't know. I mean, we're just starting prep. So it's going to be 6-8 weeks of prep before I have to be standing. So I said, yeah, I could probably do my board and stuff like that from a wheelchair. And we'll see, So he says, well, I want you to do it. So I'm going to tell them that I don't care who they want to give me. You're going to do it.
Oh, great.
And it actually helped me bond with him in such a way that we became really close, because by the time we were filming, I was on crutches. We were filming in San Francisco, which is not the greatest place with hills and everything else, but I was managing. I was getting along. And I never thought about my leg. I mean, in fact, the whole idea of working kind of took my mind off the fact that my leg was healing, and it was fine. Everything, I never
That's
worried
great.
about it. So it actually
worked out.
It actually worked out.
It makes me laugh when you mention Herb Wallerstein. You got to hear this story. Peg worked for Irwin Allen, and there were 3 Wallersteins. There was Herb Wallerstein, Norm Wallerstein, and Roe Wallerstein.
That's right.
And they always told me, no, there's no such thing as Wallenstein. It's Wallerstein. So when I was out of work and wanted to get on the lot at Fox, I would say, oh, this is Joe Wallerstein. And the guy would say to me, oh, you're related to Herb? I said, oh, it's Uncle Herb, right? Roe Wallerstein actually worked for me as a production manager one year on Knots Landing. But I used to call Peg because I'd arranged to pick her up. And the secretary of the front desk says, who's calling? I said, this is Joe Wallenstein. I'm looking for Peggy Wallenstein. This is Joe Wallenstein. She says to me, oh, you don't mean Joe Wallenstein. She said, you mean Roe Wallenstein. I said to her, hold on a second. I'm going to check my driver's license. I'm pretty sure I mean Joe Wallenstein.
That's great. Me doing High Anxiety was really the beginning of my producing career. It was kind of the end of my career as an AD. I mean, I was an AD, and I was at the end of the movie.
Sorry.
At the end of the movie, after we finished, Mel and I had become pretty close, friendly. And he said, look, my wife is going to do a movie, and I'm getting Fox to pay for it, but I'd like you to supervise the movie. So
That's great.
I became an associate producer really, on Anne Bancroft's movie. It was the only thing she ever directed, called Fatso.
Oh, yeah.
And that was
Dom DeLuise?
Dom DeLuise,
Yeah.
And that was the movie.
I
From
remember.
Fatso, it went from High Anxiety to Fatso. In the meantime, I had gotten the script for Elephant Man, and
That's a whole that thought.
Okay.
I want to talk about
Sure.
that. But what makes me laugh about Fatso is the only thing I remember about that movie is Dom DeLuise. He chained all the closets,
Yes,
and
yes.
then ripped them off the wall. And I thought, I understand exactly where you are, Mo.
Yes. Well, there was a group in the movie. It was a takeoff on Jenny Craig and all of the
Yeah.
Weight Watchers. It was called the Chubby Checkers. She called them. The Chubby Checkers were the same thing as Weight Watchers. You'd have somebody as soon as you had an urge to eat, you would call somebody up it was like Alcoholics Anonymous. You'd call your sponsor to talk you down off
From
the food,
food. Oh, yeah.
And of course, they start talking. I mean, he does that. He calls these people. They come in, and they've already chained all of the cupboards in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And these two guys, they start talking about food, and the next thing you know, they're
just
they're ripping the doors
I
off.
love it.
Yeah.
Speaking of Elephant Man, something most people may or may not know about Jonathan Sanger, not only has he been nominated for Academy Awards before, he actually has one for Raised Heterosexual
Raised
Dance.
male
Raised
heterosexual.
male heterosexual. Quite a career. But talk about Elephant Man.
Well, Elephant Man was an interesting thing because, I came to me in the most unusual way, and I think most of the things. One thing we should talk about,
Yeah.
Joe, because it's true, in my career certainly, and in many careers, is that the things that you think are going to be the usual path to get to where you want to be tend not to be the way it happens. It happens because of other unusual. I'll give you an example. I mean, in this particular instance, I had a babysitter. I had two young sons, and I had a babysitter. And she came while I was working with Mel on high anxiety. And we had just moved to California just maybe 6 months earlier, or no, year early, whatever it was. And so she took care of the kids, and because my wife was working and I was working. Anyway, she comes to me one day, just around the time when I was about to be out of work and I wouldn't need her so much anymore. And she says, "Look, I have a boyfriend and he's got this script, and would you read it?" So I said, sure, I'll read it, And as you well know, I mean, after moving from New York to Hollywood, you found a very different world. I mean, you'd go into a coffee shop or a restaurant.
Yeah.
Every waiter had either a script or a headshot. So, I mean, and if they thought you were in the business, you were going to be inundated with stuff. So people were always giving me headshots. Yay, I'm an actor. I said, I'm just an AD. I don't hire the actors. Go to a casting director. Fine, But that would be the thing that had happened. In this particular instance, my babysitter had a script. So she gives me a script. Her boyfriend wrote the script. It's The Elephant Man.
Maron.
200 pages long, but a very interesting story that I knew nothing about. And I started,
Talk about catching lightning in a bottle.
I mean, that was the deal. And it was on the basis of that I said, wow, this is great. I had my wife read it, who reads everything that I get involved with, and she usually tells me, don't do that. But in this case, she said, hey, this is great. So I decided I was going to call this babysitter's boyfriend and ask him over to my house, and I did. He and his friend who wrote the script came over, and I said, look, I'm an assistant director, but I'm looking to be a producer, and I really like this script, and honestly, I knew nothing about how to make something happen. But I acted like I did, and they acted like they knew what a writer was supposed to do. They'd never written before, but they came in, and so I said, look, I'd like to option your script. And they were interested. They said, well, our only fear is that, you'll option the script and you'll get rid of me, you'll get rid of us, and you'll hire some other writer, and that's the way we hear it happens in Hollywood all the time.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy. I'm not a major producer yet. I said, I'm just trying to get started, and I have no intention of getting rid of you. I said, I like what you did,
Nice.
and I'm going to keep you with it as long as I'm with it.
Nice.
So if that's what you want, that's what you got with me.
That's great.
And that was the beginning. So they agreed to option the script to me. I paid a very minimal at the time was not minimal. For me, it was a lot of money. I paid him $1,000. It was, and I said, I got a whatever. Anyway, I'm still working on Fatso at this time. And I have the script, And I have to go to New York to scout locations with Anne Bancroft because we have basically, although we're going to film almost the entire movie in L.A. on the back lot, we do have some key scenes in New York just to make it look right. And she wanted to see them. I had hired my sister as a location manager, so she went around and made some, she looked around in New York. Anne and I came into New York to scout locations. In the meantime, Mel is in the office, and it was over like a weekend. I get a phone call from Mel. I said, Mel, what's up? He said, well, my secretary gave me the script that she said you have some interest in, and I read it, because I can't sleep at night. I had to find something to read. She said, oh, you should read this. So I read the script. It was The Elephant Man. He says, I really, really thought it was great. He said, so when you get back to L.A., let's talk about this because I got some ideas.
Wow.
That was all he said. That was enough.
Yeah.
I came back to L.A., and he said, look, I want to talk to you about this because I want to start a company to do movies other than my comedies. And this would be the perfect movie to start the company. So I said, okay. He says, and I want you involved in a company, but, in this case, let's get our lawyers together and we'll sit down, we'll talk about how we can make a deal. Well, I didn't even have a lawyer. So I said, okay, sure. And I went out and got a lawyer, and brought to the meeting, and I'm in the meeting, and the meeting, strangely enough, the meeting is not in the office. Mel says, no, we're going to have a meeting, and it's going to be at the Beverly Hills Hotel. So in a room at the Beverly Hills Hotel. He said, why? He said, well, my lawyer's just flying in from New York, and that's where he's staying, so we're going to meet with him. So we go in, we meet with him, and I didn't have a lawyer at the meeting. I was just, but I said I have a lawyer. You can talk to my lawyer after we have a meeting. So we did. We talked about it, and it was a very, I would say, a very positive meeting from my point of view because he understood that I had found the project, that I had found the writers, and he totally said, look, I know you can produce it. We're going to have to find a director. We're going to have to do all this, but I think we can get this movie made, and I'd like to take it out to the studio heads that I know. And it was a very heady experience, a great deal.
Yeah.
I mean, a great deal for me.
Was it ultimately a studio picture or was it independent?
No, it was independent, but what happened, independent at a time when there was really there wasn't much that you could call independent. I mean, most studios were doing pickups, but they were really involved in the process. In this particular case, it was truly independent. It was really very much the beginning of what later became an independent movement because there was, after I went with Mel to the meetings. We had a meeting at Fox, we had a meeting with Universal, we had a meeting with Paramount, and I think that was it. Those 3 meetings were the ones I was at, and then he probably took a couple of others himself. But out of the early meetings we had, Fox was at the time was in a bit of a mess because it was right around the time when Alan Ladd Jr., who was the head of the studio, left. And, he wound up going to MGM or something. But he was the head of the studio, and there was a problem with him and Dennis Stanfill, who was the titular head of everything. The point we took it to the studios, he took me with him, and we got 2 offers. But Mel made it very clear from the beginning he wasn't looking for the studios to make the movie. He said, no, we want to make the movie. He had said this to me, and I knew nothing about the business side the way he did. He's a very, very smart guy, and he said, look, this is the way we're going to make the movie. We're going to get a domestic distributor, and we're going to get a different foreign distributor. I said, why do you want to do that? If the domestic wants to, if Paramount wants to do the whole world, he says, no, this is why we do it. He says, because they're going to cross-collateralize the movie against different territories. I didn't really quite understand it, but I learned, what that meant. And he said, what'll happen is the bad territories, they'll spend a lot of money in, and so that we'll never ever see any money. The only way to do it is have them separate so that they have to make their money in their own territory. That was what he explained to me. So I said, okay.
Yeah.
So we go to Fox, we go to Paramount. The 2 big studios that wanted it were Universal and Paramount. And the deal Universal offered was they would charge a distribution fee, a certain amount of money. Let's say the distribution fee was 20%. And or 20, 25 or 30%, whatever the number was. It was probably 25%. And as the movie did better, they would drop their distribution fee till it got down to about 18%. So it sounded like a good deal because the more money the movie made, the less money they would take.
Right.
So I thought, oh, that's a great deal. Let's see what Paramount says. Paramount said the exact opposite. We'll start at 18%. And then if the movie does a certain amount, we're going to raise our fee to 20%. And if it does a little better, we're going to raise it to to 25%, and it'll stay at 25%. So I said, how is that, does that make any sense? Mel says, that makes perfect sense. I said, really? I don't understand. He says, no, you don't understand. For them to make real money, they have to chase it. So it means they have to put more money in advertising to get to the point where the movie makes more money.
That's pretty astute.
And he said, so we go with them, they're likely to push it much harder. Universal, on the other hand, since their fees are going down, they're going to drop it. They're not going to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
And
pretty
so
astute.
we wound up going with Paramount and just for domestic distribution.
What's remarkable about the Elephant Man was it got all these Academy Award nominations, and yet it's very much not a Studio Academy movie.
Well,
it was just a good movie, which is kind of remarkable in its day.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a very interesting thing because we had the main reason I think that happened was because Frank Mancuso, who was the head of distribution for Paramount, saw the movie in New York. He had his office in New York, and he loved it. Yeah. And that made a tremendous difference. So he said they had already bought it, but he really loved the film. And he said, we're gonna spend the time and really do the job and really get this out.
That's great.
We said, great. But the interesting thing was we had a date for the opening date, and they had one other movie, and Elephant Man was a pickup because they didn't finance it. They were just distributing it. The other movie was Ordinary People. That was directed by Robert Redford. And they wanted, obviously they made that movie.
Right.
Now, both movies are being released at the same time, and we had a date that was a perfect date for us. And like a week after they announced the date, I get a call from them saying, we decided to move your date back 2 weeks because we're opening Ordinary People on the date that we had originally wanted. Anyway, I was upset about it, but I didn't really know much about the process. What had turned out, and what I was told later, is that Redford heard that they were going to open our movie first, and he went to them and he said, no, I want you to open my movie first. Yeah. So on the basis of Redford and their relationship with him, this is the kind of thing that happens in our business all the time. It was a Hollywood thing. Okay, it didn't matter. The thing was we weren't really, we were competing. Ultimately, we competed in the Academy Awards. We were both nominated, and they won for Best Picture that year. Although I know a lot of people have said to me, in hindsight and over the long run, if you take a look at that year, and it happens often with the Academy Awards, you might think that the better picture was Elephant Man. I said, look, it's not about better picture. It's a good movie. That's all.
John. Hey, John, I can't thank you enough. This is great. As we both know from having done it, we could stay here.
No, I know.
The
we
sun
could
would
talk
go
for days.
down. He'd go to bed. The sun would come up.
No, it's all good. Anytime you want me, I'm always willing to have conversation with you, Joe.
I love it.